I think far too many people get caught up in thinking that you have to have some sort of, I don't know, metric of success, whatever that particular thing is, and that you need to, if you don't reach that metric of success, then what you're doing is not worthwhile. You know, you don't shouldn't do this particular thing, and you should quit. Right? I am a big believer of figuring out in your head how you could do things that it feels like a hobby, or it feels like you're just kind of goofing off, or how can you actually sustain something until you're 80 years old, and what might that actually look like? Right? So instead of viewing that you have to work extremely hard all the time, which you do, right? Like, I'm not discounting any of that. I think that there, in most things in life that are worthwhile or require a great deal of work, but it's thinking about, what are the little tweaks? What is it that you can do so it doesn't feel like that? What is it that you can just kind of goof around with it and be able to do it for a lifetime? I think about that a lot in terms of it's a different view of doing work. It's a different view of what we do in society. I think that there are a lot of really great tools today that allow us to do this and to, be able to get to a point where you could just enjoy and goof off with things, right? Like, just have a fun time with various different things. And now I'm not saying that um, working on something, whatever that particular thing is, I'm going to come back to, um, you know, whatever the thing that you're working on doesn't have to be, it, I'm not saying that you shouldn't sort of strive within a particular career not to do everything sort of perfectly, but what I'm suggesting is that there's lots of other things that can be done in a meaningful, fun way in your life that you can sustain for a great deal of time. And so it's thinking about the activities that you do in your life that require, some of it requires a great deal of effort and concentration, right? Like, you want astronauts when they're sort of going off in a rocket ship to be fully concentrated, but there's lots of other things that are enjoyable, that can add value in your life, and that maybe can substitute for that rigorous activity that you're thinking about. So I'm thinking, and then the other element is thinking about how do you monetize, how do you make it into sort of a profitable thing that you're having fun at doing this particular thing at the same time. Um, I think that's actually the easy part, and I know that seems like ridiculous, but the harder part is figuring out how you could do things for a sustained period of time. If you look at, like, what most people do, and maybe you don't need to do it for a sustained period of time. Maybe you just, you know, tell the story of how you sort of switch from thing to thing to thing to thing. If you look at what most people do, they kind of do things for a little bit and then they switch, do things for a little bit, switch, do things for a little bit, switch. And a little bit, depending on who you are, it might be a week, or it might be, a month. And figuring out how to actively engage and tell your story, figuring out what that is for you, I think is an important piece of the puzzle so you can sustain your particular thing. Now, how do you monetize that? Right? Like, how do you actually turn this, if you're thinking of making into a career where you're just kind of goofing off at various different elements of your life and various different activities, where you're kind of just playing around with things? I think that is where you figure out, you leverage the available technologies that you have and the available things that you have right now that allow you to monetize that in the long run and have fun at that particular thing. So, um, maybe it is that you love to do yard work, right? And every once in a while, you putter around and do somebody else's yard work, where you do some creation at someplace else. Well, that's actually really fun, right? Like that is a good activity that you can get a little bit of extra value from that, and that's kind of a hobby. Now, to turn that from a hobby, kind of goofing off at things, to something a little bit more serious requires you to focus on some elements of it, maybe go around one day, ask for people to, for referrals, sort of basic things like that. But, the other component is making sure that you sort of have a good time with it. And so it's this balance of thinking about how much I should um, go full force, right? And what I'm talking about is sort of messing around with the level of intensity and seriousness that you actually have with this particular thing, and finding the right level of intensity and seriousness where you are both sort of, serious, having fun, but also, having fun that it's sustainable for a lifetime, or sustainable for something that you want to do for a great deal of time. And I think it's easy for human beings, it's probably easy for any organism, to dial things up, way too much or way too little, right? Where you're like super, super intense for extremely short period of time, which is what I tend to see a lot more. But I know the most of the world, because that's just the world that I live in terms of the academic research game. um, but then on the opposite side, I think far too many people dial it down far too little, and they don't pursue things that are interesting or fun or that allow you to goof around. And with the availability of digital platforms that we have today, you know, things like, podcasting, or things like, YouTubing, and various different, all these other kind of platforms that we have access to, you can do that. Now, you can do that and make, some people, if they really dial it up and they really turn it into something, it could be a serious, serious entity that is really powerful. But you can also do it and have fun for an extended period of time, and have an enjoyable experience where you're making some extra, side cash or whatever, right? And I think we tend to go far too much on one or the other, right? So many of you will probably, some of you might listen to this and think, well, I'm gonna, start a podcast or whatever, and you start doing it, and then you're gonna go crazy hard, and you're gonna realize nothing happens, right? Like seriously, nothing will happen. And then you'll be like, I don't know what to do. So one out of 10,000 might have some sort of really fun experience where all of a sudden it blows up because they're just a really, people just like what they're doing, or they have a nice sort of tone of voice or whatever. And then it might blow up very quickly and they have this wonderful experience. But for most people, it's going to be just drudgery, right? So how do you turn that drudgery, where it's like, yeah, this is not so fun, how do you turn it into something that is like, it's fun and enjoyable, and you kind of build up over time? And that's where you just make it part of your life. You make it like an extension where you're having fun. You don't take it seriously. You just kind of goof around as much as you possibly can, right? And sort of make this sort of the ebb and flow of your life, rather than making it into something that's super, super serious. And maybe, if you're lucky and fortunate, things can turn into something else eventually, into a little bit more of a serious entity. But, you know, just have fun is what I'm saying. Like, figure out the right pace where you can goof around with things, take it seriously, and just, sustain it, right? Like, don't go one way too rigorous in one way, or just never do it in another way. Just kind of figure out how to sort of change who you are, and love the process of doing anything where you can sustain it indefinitely, as long as you're living and enjoying what you're actually doing. All right, take care and have a wonderful day.